We are starting a brand new series today called Playlists. Anybody excited about playlists? This is one of my favorite series that we do all year long. We've done it for 3 or 4 years now straight, and we love this series. And the reason I love this series is because I love music. Do I have any other music connoisseurs in the house? Anybody else who just loves music? All right, my 12:30 service is ready to help us out in just a minute then. But I love music. I love all kinds of music. I'm kind of an eclectic music connoisseur. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, kind of my formative years. And so any other children of the 80s and 90s here, we all love grunge, alternative rock a little bit, right? You had a lot of flannel in middle school and high school. You wore a lot of dark clothes with that flannel. And groups like Nirvana, like you've heard of Nirvana, right? So I felt so old the other day because Pastor Alex, who is our unbelievable pastor over ministries, leads our students so well, does an incredible job, but I had a problem with him. And I just got to tell you, we were in my vehicle. We're on the way to go throw axes. Have you guys gone yet to throw axes at a Target? It is so much fun. Go over and throw some axes. So we were throwing axes, and we had some of the staff in my vehicle. We were driving towards the axe place, and we were talking music. And we were just talking about music that we love. And I found out that Pastor Alex has no idea who Pearl Jam is. I was like, get out of my car. Just get out. Walk the rest of the way. I couldn't believe it. But we know children of the 80s remember that. Now, I have to say, my favorite music, though, and you might not would guess this, maybe you would if you've been around for a little while. If you were to just go get my iTunes Music app on my phone and just start to listen to it, you would find out my favorite is rap. Like, I love hip-hop. I love rap. I grew up on the mean streets of Moco, all right? So we were listening. And I'll tell you, Parrish Tyler and I, Parrish had this CD that he had dubbed from somebody of Eazy-E. And so we would listen, and I had dubbed a dub of his dub, or a dub of his dub of his dub. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't very good. It was granular. It didn't sound really good, but it had some Eazy-E. We had to sneak it from our parents back in the day, but we were listening to some Eazy-E. We listened to some Dr. Dre. We listened to some Snoop Dogg. That was kind of what I grew up on. But now I have to tell you, if you were to come and if I'm on the treadmill and you were just like, I want to see what pastor's listening to. I love worship music. Don't get me wrong. We all love worship. It's our favorite, right? But I would be listening to some clean Kendrick. I'm just going to tell you, I would probably be running to some Drake. Probably clean. It depends on what mood I'm in. If I'm in a really bad mood, it might not be the clean, but I'm just telling you. And so I'd be running to some Drake. That's what I'm going to listen to. But there's a chance I might have some Johnny Cash playing. There's a chance of that. I'm very eclectic music style. Might even have some 21 Pilots playing. That might be going on, so there's a chance of that. And I'm not afraid to admit, I'm an eclectic guy when it comes to music. I like some T-Swivel. I'm okay with some Tay-Swift. I'm all right with Taylor Swift. You guys, any Taylor Swift fans in the house anymore? Is everybody not like her anymore? I like her new song. I like everything that's going on with that. I like that. And I really like to find out why people write songs, like the lyrics behind them. I like to go and look up what people think they mean. So I love the Billy Joel channel when it's on Sirius Radio. He kind of goes through why he wrote the song and who influenced him to write the song and like where he was at when it happened. I love that because I love lyricists. But the greatest lyricist of all times is not Jay-Z. It's not Garth. For you country fans, that's the only music I don't like is country. And so for you country fans, it's not Garth, it's not them. The greatest lyricist of all times is KD. And I'm not talking about KD from the Warriors, though I hope he comes back. I'm talking about King David. Greatest lyricist ever. If you read the Psalms, you will find some of the greatest poetry, some of the greatest lyrics that have been laid down were by King David. So here's what we're going to do over the next 5 weeks together. We're going to take King David and his life, and then parallel to King David, we're going to put some of the songs that we love right now that are in the top 20 of all of the songs that are going on right now, and we're going to bring them together and make some parables out of them, because that's what a parable was like. Jesus would take something that was common to everybody, and he would bring that close by parallel to a truth that he was trying to teach. And so we're going to do that over the next 5 weeks, and today we've got a top 20 summer hit from the band Panic at the Disco, and that we're going to find out like how our our goals, how our future, how our dreams can come together, that if we dig enough, that we can find that we can have high, high hopes.
Had to have high, high hopes for a living. Shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. Didn't have a dime, but I always had a vision. Always had high, high hopes. Had to have high, high hopes for a living. Didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be there, one in a million. Always had high, high hopes. Mama said, fulfill the prophecy, be something greater. Go make a legacy, manifest destiny. Back in the days, we wanted everything, wanted everything. And Mama said, burn your biographies, rewrite your history, live up your wildest dreams, learn victories. Every day we wanted everything, wanted everything. Mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated. All tied up, no more love, and I hate to see you waiting. Had to have high, high hopes for a living. Shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. I didn't have a dime, but I always had a vision. Always had high, high hopes. Had to have high, high hopes for a living. Didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be there, one in a million. Always had high, high hopes. And Mama said, to build for oddities, a stranger crusaders. Ain't ever wannabes, a wedding and novelties. Don't ever change, we wanted everything, wanted everything. Stay up on that rise, stay up on that rise, never come down. Stay up on that rise, stay up on that rise, never come down. Mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated. All tied up, no more love, and I hate to see you waiting. They say it's all been done, but they haven't seen the best in me. Hey, hey, hey. So I got one more on, and it's gonna be a sight to say. Hey, hey, hey. Sing it out. High hopes for the living, shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. I didn't have a dime, but I always had a vision. Always had high, high hopes. Had to have high, high hopes for the living. Didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be there, one in a million. Always had high, high hopes. Had to have high, high hopes for the living. Shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. Didn't have a dime, but I always had a vision. Always had high, high hopes. Had to have high, high hopes for the living. Didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be there, one in a million. Always had high, high hopes.
I love lyrics that are hope-filled because I know Brendan Urie, the writer of that song, is talking about breaking through in the music industry, but I think that all of us have breakthroughs that we need in our lives, and to get through, we've got to have some hope. And so I love hope-filled lyrics just like this. Look at the lyrics. It said, I had to have high, high hopes for a living, shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing, didn't have a dime, but I always had a vision, always had high, high hopes. You know this, and I know this to be true. We cannot live without hope. We need hope to be able to get to the next thing. We need hope to be able to break through. And we all have breakthroughs in our lives. I'm thinking about young adults that are here. And you're trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do with my life? Well, what am I going to do in the next phase of my life? How am I going to succeed in life? The world is changing right before us. Jobs that exist today won't exist in 20 years. And young adults have to be thinking, how will I break through and find what God has for me? I think about new parents. I remember those days of being a brand new parent 13 plus years ago and just thinking, how will we do this? How will we raise children? And how will we break through with them? And how will we see that they get a chance in life? And how will we make sure that they love Jesus? And there had to be a breakthrough. I think about those of you who maybe are praying for, asking for, hoping for a promotion at your job. Right now, you may would even say, I've just got that entry-level job, but I need to be able to walk up the ladder in some way. I need that promotion. I want to grow. I want to be a better leader. I want that better job. And I think about the breakthrough, the hope that it needs and it takes to be able to break through in a promotion. It's even on a new job. Maybe you're just starting a new career, a new job, and you're thinking, how do I break through in this? How do I get to where I need to be? How do I have the hope that I need? Or maybe as a spouse, you're going, man, marriage has got to be better than this, or we want to be better than this. Even though we're doing great, we want to be so much better. And so you're looking for a breakthrough as a spouse in your marriage. Just the other night, I was up here and just came to greet some folks that were here doing a meeting. It's our first ever gathering of grandparents. And so we had a speaker come in and had someone come in and just teach grandparents how to be godly grandparents. And I was thinking, what a crossover that is when you go from just being a parent to now being parents of people who have children, and thinking, what does a godly grandparent look like? How do they behave? What do they do? How do they support? And it takes a breakthrough. And I was looking at all of these breakthroughs, and every single one of us has somewhere in our lives where we need to break through right now. But breakthroughs are pushed through by hope. It's by hope. It's just a little seed that you need of hope, but it is a hope. In fact, I just want everybody to say the word because it just is hope-filled to say it on 3. Everybody shout out hope. 1, 2, 3, hope. We need hope in our lives. We need breakthrough in our lives, and we need to be able to find those moments where hope can push us through. And as I think of David, his entire story is built upon hope. It's built upon high hopes, the high hopes of a people, the people of God. And the people of God, God had a plan for them. He had a plan for how he was going to redeem them. He had a plan for how he was going to use them. But it all rested in the high hopes that started with men and women before David, but sort of rested on David to be able to push forward to the hope that would come in Jesus. And so there were hopes in David's life, but to really find where the hope began for David, we've got to go back a couple of generations, and we have to actually take a look at the beginning for David. And the real beginning for David is to go back to the book of Ruth and to find his great-great-grandmother, Ruth, and her story with her mother-in-law, Naomi. It's a few generations removed from David, but that's where the actual beginning for David is. And why do we want to go back and look at David's beginning? Because our beginnings matter. They matter. The beginning of everything that we do matters. And I know oftentimes that at the beginning, it feels so small, so insignificant. When you first start that entry-level job, it feels small. It feels insignificant. When you're first taking that class that will go towards a degree, it feels so small, so insignificant. Those first few moments of dating, it feels so small, so insignificant. But what I'm learning is that our beginnings really do matter, and we see that in the story of David as we trace back to Naomi and to Ruth. In fact, Zechariah 4:10 says, God says, do not despise small beginnings. Let me tell you, he says, do not despise small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work that is happening and to see the work begin. He says, don't despise small beginnings, because oftentimes these small beginnings are just what looks like something small that is going to be developed into something so much better. And so it's important that we talk about our beginnings. And you want to talk about small beginnings. Let me talk about David's great-grandmother, Ruth. And his great-grandmother, Ruth, was an amazing story, an amazing woman in this book of the Bible that tells her story. But she started off with a very, very small beginning. She started off, in fact, with a very painful beginning. I love the rawness and the authenticity of the book of Ruth, because if I'm going to write a story about the great-grandmother of the risen Lord, or of David, and the great-grandmother to the 28th power to our risen Lord Jesus, I'm not going to make it be this raw. Like, there's a lot of pain associated with Ruth's story. There's a lot of just discouragement. There's a lot of hurt that rolls in. If I'm writing the story that's going to be about the great-grandmother of David and the great to the 28th power grandmother of Jesus, I'm going to dress it up a little bit better than this. But the rawness and the transparency of this story just reminds us of how true and how real the Bible really is. And so what we see in this story of Ruth and Naomi is we see a lot of hurt. Naomi loses her husband, and he dies a young death. And in the same season, she then loses a son to death, and then another son to death who was also Ruth's husband. And so in this very small amount of time, Naomi and Ruth are faced with incredible pain, incredible hardship, and they find themselves destitute poor. They find themselves without a way to eat, to survive. And finally, they decide that they're going to have to go towards Bethlehem, where some of Naomi's family is, just to try and make it, just to try and live. They are truly in a hopeless situation. And as they settle in Bethlehem, they settle in the fields and start to work in the fields of a man named Boaz. And eventually, you can read the story for yourself in the book of Ruth. It's an amazing story. But eventually, Ruth and Boaz would fall in love with one another. And Boaz would marry Ruth, and then they have a son. And they have a son, and they name him Obed. Now, I know some of you are pregnant, and you're getting ready to have a child. And if you haven't picked out a boy name, Obed's a pretty strong name. I'm just saying. It's not in the top 20, probably not even the top 100 list. You'd be original, and you'd have a strong biblical name. And Obed is there in the book of Ruth, and he leads us to David. Look at this. Ruth chapter 4, verses 16 through 17. Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if she were her own. The neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again." And they named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. David's life starts with generational pain. Can I just get a shout out from anybody in here who's had some generational hardship and pain in your life through your family? Just give me a hoop and a holler. Just let me know if you've ever experienced any pain in your family. Some of you aren't clapping. You must be going to be the one that starts it for your family, you know? Because we've all of us in here have had some generational pain throughout the years in our family. We like to say of our family, we put the fun back in dysfunctional. Like you guys, any of y'all like that? And David saw that. He saw in his life that there was generational pain. But that generational pain was there, but she decided, Naomi did, and she decided, Ruth did, that they were going to press forward in spite of this generational pain that David's life starts with. Naomi shows us someone who is literally destitute poor, without any hope whatsoever. She actually, in the story, she names herself bitter. She says, "I am named bitter because the Lord has not been good to me." She says, "and I am a bitter woman." But with her choices, and I want you to hear that, she had some choices to make. In the midst of her hurt, in the midst of her bitterness, in the midst of her pain, she was able to make some choices that changed her life. And with her choices, she would redirect hope towards future generations that would come. I want you to hear this because it's so important. Because oftentimes we think that us battling through, breaking through, finding hope in our life is only for us. And so we can get discouraged and we can quit and we can not push forward because we think, well, it's just about me. But what you've got to understand is when you find hope, when you push forward through your pain, when you're able to send hope ahead of you, that you are sending it to future generations who will not have to deal with some of the things that you have had to deal with. In fact, I know there are some of you here who would say, maybe even back of your grandfather or your father, you would be able to say, yeah, it was a hard life that they gave. It was hardness that they gave to us. They sometimes didn't know how to show love, but they did the best they could do with what they had been given. If you had only known what happened to them, and if you'd only known how it happened to them, and each generation is able to press forward and push forward some hope, and able to give the future generations that are ahead of them a legacy of some hope. And David's life is one that we see that Naomi is able to make some choices And Ruth is able to make some choices that pushes ahead to her grandson and her great-grandson, and they find hope ahead. Look at what the lyrics of the song say that reminds us, and it seems parallel to what's happening in David's life. It says, Mama said, maybe we should say great-grandmama said or grandmama said, fulfill the prophecy, be something greater, go make a legacy, manifest the destiny. He said, Mama said there's so much more that you can see happen. And Naomi, with her choices, sets up the opportunity for future generations, for her great-grandson. Ruth, with her choices, sets up the opportunity for her grandson to have a different life than they would have had if Naomi hadn't found hope. In fact, I would even say that it's a possibility that God would have had to go a different route than with David if Naomi hadn't have made the choices that she made. She sent ahead hope ahead of her that changed people's lives. And I love the lyrics to the song. We see this in Naomi's story. We see this and we can put it into ours. It says this. Brendan Urie says, burn your biographies, rewrite your history. A biography is a book that is written about you by someone else. Anybody ever had a biography written about them? So not one that was published maybe, but one that got around. This is when people had something to say about you. They had things that they wanted to say, that they wrote your story for you. They said what you would turn out to be. They said how you had failed and how you'd never make it past it. They characterized you, maybe even questioning your character in ways and talking about you in ways that just weren't true. And he said there's a biography that goes ahead. And here's what I want to say. Burn the biographies and rewrite an autobiography about yourself and say, no, this is who I am. This is who I am. And Naomi decided, at some point she woke up and she decided, you know what? I'm going to rewrite the biographies. I know what all the women are saying about me. I know what everybody's talking about. They're saying how I don't have a son, I don't have a husband. I know what everyone's saying about whether we will make it or not, Ruth. I know that they're saying we'll never make it, that we'll be destitute, poor. I know they're saying that we'll never have any hope. But at some point, we know that Naomi woke up and said, you know what? Burn the biographies. I'm ready to write an autobiography. And can I tell you, the greatest source that you'll quote in your bibliography of your autobiography is the very source of who created your story to begin with, because God's already written a story about you. He already has plans for you. He's already written the whole book for you. You're just looking at one little sentence and one little chapter, and you're fixating on it. And he's saying, burn all of that. Burn what other people said about you, because I've got a hope for you. I'm a hope-filled God who's got a different story for you. And so it's time that we rewrite our biographies. It's time that we decide we will care more about not what others say about us, but we would give far more weight to the words God speaks over us than we would to the words of others. Did you hear that? The words that should weigh the most in your life will be the words from God, not the words from other people. And yet, don't we so often let the words of others weigh on our shoulders? You know, that's what stress is. We're letting it weigh on us. And Jesus said, he said to the Pharisees, he said, hey, you pile up things on top of them that weigh too much. The words of others were piling on them. But he says, but God's words, and I came to give you freedom, to give you a lighter step. And so we need to give more weight to what God says about us than we do to others. We need to care more about who he says that we are. We need to care more about the biography, the autobiography that he's allowing us to write about ourselves. Don't let the world take over writing your story. I know you've been through some stuff. I know that the future that you think you have for yourself and that God says you have for yourself doesn't add up and doesn't make sense. But aren't the greatest stories in the world the ones that don't make sense and don't add up? Or aren't the ones that come together and you go, how in the world did that happen? Only by God's grace. Because no matter what has happened to you, you are still who God created you to be. You are still designed by God. And so it's time to burn the biographies. Brendan Urie, the lead singer and songwriter for Panic at the Disco, said this upon the release of the song High Hopes. He said, I spent too long not setting my expectations high enough, worried about how it would feel, how it felt to fail. I hit a point when I realized I had to aim high and then I would fail, fail in order to keep growing. And one of the reasons we have to rewrite our biographies is because we've got to rewrite our failures. I think way too often we let people convince us that our failures are something that brings us down, when failures really are the thing that helps us to grow. J.K. Rowling, who wrote one of the greatest series of novels that has ever sold in our world, the Harry Potter series, was a waitress and on government assistance as she wrote the first rendition of the books. And she submitted it to dozens and dozens and dozens of publishers. None of them would publish the books. She kept submitting them though, and finally, one publisher, the CEO of the company actually, took it home and was going to read it. Before he could, his 8-year-old daughter picked it up, and she began to read the first book of the Harry Potter series. And she went to her dad and she said, "You have to publish this. Other kids have to read this." And so it was just on the advice of his 8-year-old daughter that he took a chance, and it became one of the best-selling books that has ever graced our world. And J.K. Rowling said this: failure meant stripping away all that was inessential. Failure allows us to be able to find hope. It's when we fail that we take away everything that is inessential, everything that we don't need in our lives, and we're able to concentrate on the things that matter. The greatest basketball player who has ever played the game, no, not LeBron, Michael Jordan, said this. He said, "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career." He said, "I've lost over 300 games, and on 26 occasions, I have been entrusted to take the game-winning shot, and I failed. I missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life." And then he said this, and I love this quote, "And that is why I succeed." Because we start to rewrite our biographies and we find hope in our failures. And we know that failure pushes us more and more closer to where we will succeed. I love this quote by Thomas Edison. You've probably heard it before. But Thomas Edison was told that he was too fidgety for school. His teacher actually said, and her quote, not mine, "You're too stupid for school." And so he was pulled home and homeschooled by his mom. He also was deaf in one ear and couldn't hear very well, so they didn't think he could make it through school. And Thomas Edison has invented so many things that we couldn't even list them all in one sermon. But the one we know the best is the light bulb. And he said on his invention of the light bulb, he said, "I have not failed. I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that do not work." And that's what we got to go to our marriages and go, "I didn't fail today. I just found one more way that doesn't work. I didn't fail today in parenting when you come home and find things up their nose and things in their ears and crayon writing on the walls. You go, you know what? I didn't fail today. I just found one more thing that doesn't work. I'm not going to leave crayons out anymore. They can't have those. I thought they were smart enough. They're not." And so you just move forward. You got to find the things. You got to find the hope and go, "It's not failure. It is my ability to fail, but press forward that allows me to strengthen my faith." Failure is the fertilizer that will strengthen your faith if you will allow it to. If you will say, "God, how can you use this failure in my life?" Even our sin, in some regards, pushes us towards success, because it is in our sin that we realize our need for a Savior, which pushes us forward to Jesus, who is the only one who is able to save us and the only success that we will ever have in our lives. And so we need to rewrite our biographies. You want to talk about small beginnings, though? Look at the expectations that people had for David. We talk about KD, King David. We talk about this amazing lyricist. We talk about this king. But you want to see a small beginning. Let's take a look at David's story, because David's story shows us truly small beginnings. Look at this. King Saul, the first king, he had been anointed king by Samuel, has now been rejected by God. He's rejected by God because of his sin, and God says he's no longer able and worthy to be king. And God comes to Samuel and he says, "Hey, it's time to move on from Saul. I have a new king." And he sends him to whose house? Jesse's house. The son of who? Obed, the son of who? Ruth, the daughter-in-law of who? Naomi. So he sends them to Jesse's house. And Jesse brings out exactly who we would have brought out. How many of you in here have a brother or a sister who was always the favorite? Always a favorite, always a favorite. And they were always the one who was perfect. They were always the better looking. They were always the smart one. They were good in athletics. It was just everything was perfect about them. If I made you bitter just now, go to the cross afterwards and repent. Now, I was that person for my siblings. I'm just joking. They laughed harder at that last service about that. And so you've had that person. Well, Jesse brings out the favored son. And he brings out this tall, handsome, amazing son. He's like, if the king is going to be anointed from my family, here he is. Comes out and God says, nah, I pass. Not going to get the rose at the end of The Bachelor. Not staying on the island. Not going to win the American Idol. You're gone. So David goes, all right, well. Jesse goes, all right, well, I'll bring out a next one. This has got to be, something's wrong with him. I'll bring out this one. Brings out another one. God passes again. Brings out 7 more sons. And God passes and passes and passes and passes and passes and passes and passes. And finally, Samuel says, hey, can I ask you a question? Have you sent out all of your sons? And Samuel told Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. Are these all the sons that you have? Can you imagine being in that position? You're like, here's my sons, and is this all you got? You got a cousin somewhere. You got a distant relative. You got a friend who's just staying over, hanging out with you all a little bit. You got anybody else at all that you could send? Because God told me to come here, but he's rejected all of your sons so far. And so Jesse answers, well, there's still the youngest one. And Jesse goes, well, I got the runt of the litter. He's out there tending the sheep. I didn't even bother to actually call him in. Like, it wasn't worth it because I knew we weren't going to get to this point. But I guess I could call him in. Look at the expectations. You talk about small beginnings. You talk about expectations. You talk about, having some daddy issues. You talk about ending up on a couch one day talking to a therapist about how I just was never loved by my dad. He didn't even know there was American Idol going on, much less. He didn't even make it to the tryouts. And David is there, and he says, all right, well, this is what I think of him. I didn't even call him in. This is just a small thing, but let me remind you of this. Don't let others' hopes for you hinder God's plan for you. There are a lot of hopes that people have for you. People who love you have hopes for you. People who don't love you have hopes for you. Even if they love you, they may have hopes that aren't the hopes that God has for you. Don't let their hopes for you hinder God's plan for you. And so Jesse says he's tending the sheep. Samuel told Jesse, he's tending the sheep, Jesse said. And then Samuel told Jesse, send someone to get him. We won't continue until he gets there. So Jesse sent for him, and he had a healthy complexion. I love that the Bible chooses to tell us about David's complexion. He had attractive eyes, and he had a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, go ahead, anoint him. He is the one. See, as we're looking for hope in ourselves, and as we're looking for hope in others, we've got to realize that God has a different equation for finding hope in someone. He's got a different equation for finding hope in you as well. In fact, a few verses earlier, this is what God said about his filter for finding hope. 1 Samuel 16:7 says this, the Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. He has a different equation for finding hope within someone. And then listen, in Acts chapter 13, verse 22, we find out more about David. It says, after removing Saul, he made David their king. He testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. God says. He will do everything that I want him to do. Now, come on, somebody. This is what I want my hope to be based in. I want to have the hope that I will be able to be said of, he is a man after God's own heart. He's finding his hope in God's heart. He's finding his hope in God's will. His hope is in God. His hope is in not what other people have hopes for him. His hope is not in the biographies that are being written about him, but he finds his hope, he finds his strength, he finds his center right in the center of God's will for him, and his soul is filled up by the hope that God has for him. That's the people that we need to be as the church, that we find our hope in God. And so David has this heart that is a heart that beats the heartbeat of God. But there's one more big idea in this life of David as we see it beginning and coming out of Ruth and Naomi's story. There's one more idea I think that we need to capture in this story that will be so helpful to us as we find hope, because it is great to have hope. We can't live without hope. We need hope. But the honest truth is the harvest of hope comes through a complicated process. It's more difficult to find hope than we would imagine. It's a complicated process. See, when a seed is in the ground, which is what hope is, just a little seed, when it's in the ground, you can't see anything. The process that's going on is unseen to the eye. In fact, if you've ever planted anything, you know you plant something and you water it and you watch it day after day and you're wondering, like, what's going on underneath the surface? Is something starting to germinate? Is something starting to grow? Is anything happening down there, or is the seed just dead? And I think for some of you, that's where you're at in the process of hope. You're beginning to wonder, is anything going on? Is anything happening? Because the process of harvesting hope is difficult, and there's a season in the process when you don't see anything and when you don't know what's going on. You've been praying for change and you've been praying for growth and you're praying that something would happen, but you're starting to wonder, some of you right now are starting to wonder, is the seed just dead underneath the surface? And I just want to remind you that oftentimes it can look like something was buried because it was dead, but Jesus has a habit of raising dead things and making growth come out of them. And there's a harvest that's about to happen in your life, but you can't see it. You can't, the process is so hard because you're watching and you're praying and you're pleading and you're asking God, what can I do? And remember the lyrics of the song. Mama said, don't give up. It's a little complicated. See, in the moment that you want to give up, you've got to remember it's what you can't see yet. It's what's being done underneath the surface. It's what's happening when you have no idea that growth is going on. It is what you can't see that matters so much. And we're going to see over the next 4 weeks after this together that David's life presents a few complications. David has some complicated things as he's trying to harvest hope. And we're going to learn from David. But can I show you what he was doing when the seed was in the ground? Because I think if you can take that from here and put this into your life, you really will have a seed that is planted of high hopes. Because David did something that we need to learn from him. Now, we all know that David's big breakout was not when Samuel prayed over him. It was not when he was called out of the fields and he was prayed over and anointed and said, you are going to be the king. That was not really his big breakout. His big breakout was 3 years later when he faced Goliath. You guys may remember the story. And David goes out with just some stones and he goes out with just a little slingshot and he faces down this giant Goliath. But you may not know how he got to that point. What happened in the 3 years? From the time Samuel comes, Jesse calls David out of the fields, says, come here, son. I forgot to invite you to the party, but you're invited now. You're a belated invite, right? And so he calls him up. Samuel goes, that's him. That's your king. What happened in the 3 years? Because you would think that David, right then, that Jesse just put a crown on him and that he became royalty and that his brothers like bowed down to him and was like, hey, there's the king. No. What happens is Jesse goes, all right, son, that was fun. but there's still some sheep that need tending. And he goes back out into the fields, and he's still taking care of his father's sheep. In fact, he's still taking care of them when his brothers are sent to battle to be a part of King Saul's battalion. And so they go to war, and they're involved in the fight, and they're involved in the game, and David is still tending sheep. One day, about 3 years after Samuel had showed up to his house, David is called by Jesse, and Jesse goes, hey, I want you to go and check on your brothers. Make sure they're okay. And hey, while you're at it, why don't you take them some water and some food? David was literally the water boy for the football game. That's what he was. And he's going to take them some water and some food. And he gets there, and he finds out that Goliath, this huge Philistine, has been every day for about 45 days, has been coming out and just harassing the Israelites. He's been calling them names. He's been threatening them. He's been egging them on, saying, hey, is anybody going to come fight me? And for 45 days, the Israelites have been shivering in their boots, no hope for how they would ever defeat this big, huge man, Goliath. And so all of a sudden, David shows up on the scene with some water and some bread and to check on his brothers. And he says in 1 Samuel 17, verse 32, he says, don't worry about this Philistine. Well, they all are worried about this Philistine. See, sometimes you can bring hope into a situation. When you bring your hope into someone else's situation, they may be hopeless, but you bring hope, and you can't be hopeless when someone shows up with hope. He says, don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. And Saul replied, don't be ridiculous. When you get hope, can I just warn you in advance that people will call it ridiculous? When you have hope for your marriage, some of your girlfriends are going to go, hey, it's never going to work out. He's never changed before. Why do you think that's ridiculous? Why would you think that that would change? When you have hope that you'll get pregnant when it's been 10 years and you've been trying and you didn't have any idea how it was going to happen, there will be people who will tell you it's never going to happen for you. It's not going to turn out for you. There's always going to be people when you find hope for your business and you go, this is the business I'm going to launch, and people are going to be helped by this business, and my life is going to be changed by this business. There will be people who tell you it can't happen. He says, don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way that you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy. Now here's where the big thing comes in. Because David, in these 3 years, didn't forget that he wasn't just a boy. He was a king. And he knew that he was a king. But Saul still saw him as a boy. He said, you're only a boy. And he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. He says, I've been doing what I was told to do. I've been at the job. I've been working hard. I've been trying to push forward in my marriage even when it didn't seem like it was going to work. I've been doing the last thing God told me to do. I've just been keeping on. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. And when a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. David says, you just called me a boy. Come over into my hood and see how I roll. Because I've been taking some animals, and I've been clubbing them to death. I like David because he talks a little bit of smack. See, it's good to talk a little bit of smack. Just do it in a godly way. And so verse 36, he says, I have done this to both lions and tigers and bears, oh my. David says, that's my translation, that's not in here. And he says, and I'll do it to the pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from the Philistine. Look at where he gets his hope. He says, my hope comes from the Lord. I know that he rescued me from the lions and the bears. He'll rescue me from this Philistine as well. And during those 3 years, what David had been doing is he was allowing hope to grow. He was allowing hope to take seat in him. He was allowing his soul to be filled with, he was obeying and he was growing. He was obeying and he was growing. And you know he had to have these moments where he was thinking, what in the world was this whole, you're going to be the king about? What in the world was Samuel talking about? What in the world, when is this going to happen? Because I'm not seeing any evidence of any kingship going on. But he stuck to it, and he kept fighting, and he kept killing it, and he kept fighting, and he kept working, and he kept killing it. And that's all I want to encourage us to do, is hope is a seed. It's beneath the surface. We can't see what's happening, but we got to, when you're in the JOB and you just don't understand how it's going to ever turn into a career, just keep killing it. When you're praying for your spouse and they don't seem to be making any change, running towards God at all, just keep killing it. When you're parenting and you're discouraged and you don't have any idea how it's going to work, just keep killing it. When you have no idea how it's ever going to turn out, just decide, I'm going to keep fighting the lions and the tigers, and I'm going to keep fighting the bears. I'm going to fight anything that comes towards me, and when I need to, I will face my giants. And did you hear that? That's all David had to do. He had to face the giant. He knew, I don't have to fight the giant. I just have to face it. What if we truly understood that we don't have to face our battles? God, we don't have to fight our battles. God will fight our battles for us. We just have to face them. What if we just knew, I just have to turn my eyes towards them and go, not in my house, Satan, will you be able to lead in that way. Not in my house will you be able to have a foothold. Not in my children's school will you be showing up. Not in my workplace will you be there. I just got to face down my fear. I got to face down my battle. I got to face down my giant. And in the end, I know that God will be the one who will fight for me. David knew this. That's where his hope came from. And I love Psalm chapter 9. Because Psalm chapter 9 is the lyrics that David threw down, the lines that he wrote right after he fought Goliath. And he says this, he says, I will praise you, Lord, with all of my heart. I will tell all of the marvelous things that you have done. I'm reading from here, so y'all are going to have to move. There we go. I will be filled with joy because of you. I will sing praises to your name, O Most High. My enemies retreated, they staggered and died. When you appeared. He says, Goliath staggered and died, not when a stone hit him in the head. He staggered and died because you appeared. My enemies retreated, not because David showed up. My enemies retreated because, look at the last line, for you judged in my favor. How much hope would you have if you know that God is for you and not against you? And that any enemy that comes up against you cannot prevail, because when God shows up, he's got your back. Now here's the deal though, you got to have God with you. See, you can get all riled up, and you can have hope, and you can go, hey, I've got this. But if you show up and you're just David with 5 stones and a slingshot, Goliath isn't worried about you. Goliath is worried about he who is with you. And I think for some of you guys, you have tried so hard to find hope on your own. You have tried so hard to get through difficult times, through pain, through hurt. And the truth of the matter is that you've never asked Jesus to save you. You've never said, God, would you go to the fight with me? Would you fight with me? Would you be with me? Would you save me? And God is waiting to save you. It's what he has longed for you. I know sometimes it feels like no one cares about you individually, but God does. And he wants to go into your battles with you. And he wants to fight beside you. But you've got to ask him to save you. And I think there's some of you here who've never done that before. You've tried religion. You've tried working hard. You've tried manufacturing your own hope. But you haven't tried, Jesus, would you save me? Would you help me? Our church loves to pray a prayer together that'll be a prayer for you. And we pray it with you so that we can just show you that we're in this with you. And we're going to pray this prayer out loud, but I think for some of you it will be the first time that you've ever prayed this prayer. Everybody pray out loud with me. Say, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he died on a cross and he rose from the grave to forgive me of my sins. So I give you my sins and I give you my shame, and I'll follow you all of my days. In Jesus' name, amen. If that was you, if you said, you know what, that was really the first time I've ever prayed that and meant it, the first time I ever prayed it and understood it, the first time I ever prayed it and knew that I needed it, I just want to ask you to be courageous, and just in about a couple seconds, I'm going to count to 3. And I want you just to shoot your hand up in the air to let us know that you did that so we can celebrate with you. 1, 2, 3. Would you just shoot your hand up in the air if you prayed? I see several hands that are going up. We want to get you a Bible. And then if you have that Bible in your hand, don't be alarmed if someone comes and asks you a question or congratulates you. We want to just get more information from you. We'd love to tell you more about our church and help you take the next steps that God has for you. I also, though, believe that there are some of you who have just been a little hopeless. You've asked Jesus to save you. But the truth of the matter is you've been in just a season, a dark season, where you haven't had any hope. And here's what I want to ask you to do. I want you to allow the seed of hope to be planted again in your life today. I want you to push through the pain and the hurt, and I want you to make some choices that will choose to see failure as a strengthening of your faith rather than a setback. And I want you to walk ahead. You know, you can never stumble on your past if you always walk ahead. And so what if you just walked ahead and said, I'm going to take one more step. I'm not going to stumble over my past anymore. The only way we do that is by taking steps backwards. And said, I'm going forward with hope. I've got hope in my life. And maybe you could just signify that through some of our response time. We're going to play a song now. We have crosses on either side. We'd love you just to go and maybe you could pin a sin there that you need to repent of. Maybe it's just a sin of not having hope. And say, God, I'm going to be hope-filled again. Maybe you take communion, realizing that our hope comes from Jesus, who died and was buried for us. It's his blood and his body that we're able to find hope. And then we'll sing, and there's prayer team members back in the back that would love to pray with you. And then we will sing, and we will worship the God who is the God of hope. Father, thank you so much that, God, you do come into our presence and you bring hope. That, God, you're always available to us. You love us. You walk through pain with us. You walk through hardship with us. You were there in our time of need. And so right now, God, those who are in need, I pray that you would speak to them, that they would take steps towards you as we worship you and respond to you. In Jesus' name, amen.